Miss Esther, how's it going?
It's going good. How are you?
It's another day. It's another day to be great. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the
Thank you.
podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Definitely, definitely. We're here to talk. I feel like before we hit the record button, you told me a little bit about yourself, right? I like to do things a little differently on the show. We just like to get right
Okay.
into the conversation. We get right into the meat and the potatoes and the fluff. We just, all of that. Limitless. You talk about that a lot. What does that mean for you?
Being limitless means being without the constraints in our minds. It's like we put these limits on ourselves, these barriers, like, oh, I can't do that. That's unrealistic to me. Oh, that's a far fetched dream. Things like that. I honestly believe we're all limitless, and the mountain is ourselves. And so being limitless is being at where you are free without all those voices in your mind, and that you're really living the dream, whatever that is, your dream, yourself, authentically, without fear and constraint.
Love that. Love that you say that. When has there been a time that you've not been limitless? Can you
Ooh,
span
when
that to the
was
audience?
there's a lot of times that I was not limitless. Um, I will say that I grew up with no money, right? And I grew up being like I have to help my parents. I had to get ahead. I wanted a different life for them. I wanted a different life for myself. And so at that time, I was just chasing the American dream. That's what I saw would give that security, that safety, for all of us, and stop the suffering in per se. So back then I wasn't limitless because I was just following these metrics, these check marks on what I thought, right, would be the ultimate formula. And I did. I followed all that. I got the education, I got the security job, I did all those things. But at the end, that wasn't my dream, right? I thought that was the only way forward. I thought that was the only definition of what success and fulfillment is. So I was very limited per se. Like people would see me on paper and be like, "What are you talking about? You had a director position, you had money, you had the house. You weren't limited." But I was, right? Because I was like, I wasn't even authentic. I was just like in these constraints, and even how I acted, how I dressed, how I was, how I spoke. It was a lot of like code switching to be something else, not that was not me. So there I was, not limitless. And another time too was, I'm married now, but I had gone in divorce and I had a previous marriage. Even that, like, it was part of the metrics. I had to be married by 30. I had to have, that was another one of the check marks, right? And I had to be married from someone from exactly my same like upbringing, culture. And it's not that he was a bad guy at all. It just wasn't for me, right? I had believed that this is what I could have. And it wasn't until I let go all of that, and then I met who I am, my current partner. I'm actually with someone who I actually dreamed about and wanted for myself. And that's aligned with me in terms of our purpose, our legacy, and all that. But there's so much in our mind that we think, oh, it doesn't exist. Oh, it's unrealistic. And plus all the voices around us that tell us that, like, oh, you're being too picky. You're never going to find someone if you're thinking like that. Those are all limiting beliefs, right? That's when I was being super limited. And I can keep going on and more examples,
I
but it
want
was
you to keep
just,
going on. Come
oh,
on.
keep
You're like
going on.
in my
Okay.
language in podcasts, we say you're cooking right now. So I don't know. Let's keep cooking. I like what I'm
Just
hearing.
keep, okay. Yeah. And then even in the professional sphere, right? I mean, yes, the system was working against me, right? I'm like, I'm Latina, a woman, and as I was climbing up that ladder, beating those metrics, right? I was like, I have to be a certain way. And even like my natural thing is to be really kind. And I remember like mentors telling me, you have to get rid of that, Esther, because kindness is weakness. It shows that you're naive, you're never going to get ahead, and you're in like in a man's world. And in that sense, I will say that I didn't listen to people. Now when I was like, I cannot stop being kind. I can't. So I'm gonna keep that there. But I found myself like wearing just black suits, like being super serious and not being who I was. And it wasn't until like that was, even if I made it to the position, I was like, wait, I was supposed to feel lightning. I was supposed to feel this spark being here, right? They tell you once you have that promotion, everything's set. And it wasn't like that. And it wasn't until I got out of that that I was like, I can be a leader and be myself. I can bring in my unique how to here, right? I can bring in, lift people up and stop looking at the corner and comparing. So, before when I was like limited, I was like comparing the other person, or, oh, are they getting credit? All these things. And when I really set myself free and became limitless, I realized there is no competition because we all have this unique value we bring into a space. Even if we all have similar titles or there's someone with us doing the same job, how we do that job is different. How we are there, the impact we give to everyone else is different. And it's that step from really seeing that is when I went limitless to be like, I want you to succeed and I will succeed. I'll lift you up, I lift up, like even if we're in the same, like now I'm a coach, right? Even with a group of coaches, I'm like, I know all of us bring a different thing. We have a different story. We elevate people differently. And so that's another time where that's the switch I had to make. And once I made that, right, not only did I help more people, but I soared because I was no longer worried about anyone else, right? I was more about I was more here to serve and to impact, and I knew my worth and value.
There's a lot there. There's a lot there. A lot to unpack. But I feel like what comes up for me is you speak about just everything you had to go through, society, the conditions, the pressures, right? There's internal and external, things going on in the media. We got to do this, we got to do that. We're both visible minority. And it does have a challenging situation of navigating the world, right? We're content creators, you're an author, I'm a podcaster. I do a lot of plethora of things. And I think that the audience will listen to your message, listen to my message, and then they're like, okay, there is hope. There's things that I can do. But with the pressure in society, how do we distinguish between the both? What's the right? What's the wrong? In your words.
No, and it's so hard, and not only that, even the pressure side is like the pressure of our families and of our friends, right? Because a lot of times when, I work a lot with people who want to trailblaze, they have this voice in their head that tells them there's more. There's something I want to create, right? There's something I want to do. And the voice is there, and it doesn't matter how much accolades you have and what you do, that voice is there going, there is this path for you. But when you're trailblazing, you're the first, either the first in your family, the first in your circle, the first in your environment. And so of course the people around you are not going to understand. And so that noise that you're talking about is even louder, right? Because even if you see someone from afar doing it, if your immediate circle that's never done it, it's like, oh my God, and it's like, that's too scary. You're going to lose it all. That's too risky. That's this. And I tell everybody that's what's so important to find, right? Your purpose, your calling, like what is your center? Because when it's your center, that is you. That is your North Star guiding it. Like when I started my thing about helping people identify their purpose, there was no one around me that I knew that I was doing that, right? And I'm like the first in my family to do like the entrepreneur thing and to be outside of like a safety net job or even to take these risks. And of course there are other entrepreneurs in the world, of course, but not in my immediate circle. So that noise was so loud, but I had to trust that I was always entrepreneur, right? Even when I was working in a job, even when I was, studying, I was the person helping people like find solutions, move ahead, soar, tell their story, find their way, get their path. I was always doing that. And I think he was recognizing that one, I was always that person, right? This was always my lens, always my calling, and that it's okay. I am going to be the first. It's going to be messy, right? But once you start doing that, all that noise, right? You start feeling at center, that noise doesn't matter. But at first, it's so heavy, and that initial push to be like, I'm going to believe in myself and follow this against what anyone else thinks or says, and people are always going to opinionate and always going to have stuff regardless of where you are. I am going to follow it because this is where I want to make a difference and live my legacy is hard, but it's
Well
possible.
said. Yeah, well said. And I feel like when we do things and we break away from the nest of the mainstream in society, then we get a different, how do I say this, halo, and then maybe sometimes perceived target on our back, depending on where we want to talk about.
Yes.
And you see it a lot. And I feel like for 2024, I've said is that I'm going to have a lot of just next level conversations, inspiring conversations. And I look at even how the year started, in the podcasting realm. Shannon Sharp, I don't know if you've seen the interview with him and Cat Williams. Cat Williams exposed a lot about the industry. What I say about that is that those are what we call social media influencers, sports figures, actors, comedians. And they said what they needed to say. But it said is that it's time to sit in 2024 and sit in our truth, sit into what it is we want to say, no matter how challenging it's going to be, because the right people are going to find you, right? The right people are going to champion what it is you're saying. Your audience is going to champion you. My audience is going to champion myself. And I think that so many people are fearful. They don't want to rip the band aid off. I say it all in all my episodes, rip the band aid off. It's not all about the books that we're reading. It's not all about the self development guides that we're going to in the master classes and all this. It's about sitting in and standing up for what it is you believe in. And the more you do that, the more people are going to separate. But the right people come. The right people come. And then they see you make that connection, you make that collaboration. And then they want to be like, oh, wait a minute. Let me go back around. What's Esther got going on? What's Roy got going around? It's like, it's too late because you didn't do the daily deposits. You didn't simply sit here and make the necessary adjustments to stay within that collective group. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And like I resonate so much with what you said about speaking our truth and not being scared, because it is scary. I remember when I had a very public job before and I couldn't have like a social media presence. And when I started to have a social media presence, a lot of people were taken aback by it, right? Because they knew me a different way, like now my authentic way, like where I was free and voicing everything. And like I said, some people it polarized them. But I will say that some people came around later. I tell people, it's to have, I give a lot of talks to students about having empathy. If I ever had to have even empathy for my family, right? Because at first they were like, oh my, it's scary for them. It's shocking, but they've come around. And sometimes it's that they also had people telling them, no, you have to act a certain way. You have to, those things are only in around closed doors. You can't give your truth out, or even like therapy coachings for crazies and not for you. And they grew up with those same narratives. And so when you're speaking that and going against everything they've heard, right? At first it's shocking. But sometimes, they need to hear it from you. And then they realize as they start seeing you, wow, she's really vulnerable. Wow, those are all the things I'm thinking about. Wow, look at her courage. And sometimes they come around, after a while. And it's like, you know what? Actually, at first, I've had people be like that to me. Actually, at first, I was like really doubtful. It really triggered me, but that was about me. And now I've come around to being like, you were so right. And actually, I've had that mouth throughout my whole life, even before I started this business. I remember when I first got, even the divorce was taboo. Even like when I was like, I don't want to, like things of my own opinions about things. People at first were like, no, 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 and then they've come around 10 years later, having lived the experience on their own. And so what you said really, really resonated because if we get so caught up in that, like how many likes, who's going to like it, or I only want people that are going to give us positive feedback, then you're going to get paralyzed. Actually, having reactions is what you want to have, the negative and the positive, because that means that people are listening, people are thinking about it, people are digesting that and processing that, right? And it's a great thing because that means we're like activating critical thinking and narratives and being truthful, like you said, living in our truth and being authentic.
Yeah, it's actually it's energy that we have here that you said about working and not having a public profile. And what I do for my job, a lot of people know in the city, I don't really advertise on social media. It's pretty obvious if you really pay attention to like some of the posts. You're like, wait, he's wearing okay, retail, all that good stuff. But besides the point, it's where I've always said is that word empathy, and I was talking to a colleague of mine about that. And I says empathy is sometimes not even, we talk about showing empathy to customers or empathy to guests. Saying sorry is one thing, but just showing empathy can be you listening. Could you even be brightening their day? You don't know what they're going through on the phone or on video, right? It's not all about the sorry. And I think so many people like to make sorry sound like a 3D statement on a 2D plane when it shouldn't be sorry, they should be saying. It should be a different phrase they should be using. You know what I mean? Because sorry is so loose leafed. You know, when somebody gives me praise or they give me thank you or they say, hey, like, listen, you made I'm like, I receive that. That lands with me. And then they look at you different and they're like, what? It's because they don't understand. And that's okay. You got to meet people to where they're at. But I've also said people can only hold you to the capacity that they can also hold for themselves, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. 100%.
Yeah. You know, there's so much we could get into. I feel like we can go for like 2 hours. I'm just
Yeah.
like, we're just warming up. This is like, we're just pre-game stretch and stuff like that. But you being of minority, right? I want you to speak really to that. Like, what are you doing for your community, and how are you helping the men and the women, become
No,
more aware?
absolutely. That's a big passion of mine. And actually, I do a lot of speaking at with Latino groups and in universities and also within my generation, right? Really changing that narrative, right? Changing the narrative. And what I mean by the narrative is that there's so many phrases in Spanish that you grew up with that are the opposite, that are so limiting. Like, I think I mentioned one earlier, right? That therapy's for crazies, right? Or don't make. There's a phrase called "no te hagas ilusiones." Don't create illusions, right? It's like basically telling you to stop dreaming, right? Or esas son babosadas, that's stupidity, like your dreams and your aspirations, right? And all these narratives are like you can't trust anyone. It's all very fear based, and we grew up with this, in our culture, and also in all the kitchen table talk, and like Thanksgiving and Christmas is about like, oh, did you get your promotion, did you get married, oh, look what she's doing over there, all this negative energy, right? And really what I'm about is, let's change the narrative. Have you asked the person in Thanksgiving, what are your aspirations? Hey, what do you want to be sought out for? Maybe I can connect you with someone, right? Oh, what have you thought about as your 1 to 2 year, what would you love? Like, what would you love to feel? Is there any way I could support you? Are you going through something right now? Like, asking those questions instead of these questions based on judgment, whether you've met some metric that has nothing to do whether the person's fulfilled or not, but it's more about, let me compare to see if I'm at a different metric than them, and I can then show off how I'm here, right? And we need to change that narrative as a culture, because we're not going to grow as a group, right? Or as a community if we're constantly competing with one another instead of helping one another. And also, like, the thought of mental health awareness is something I really push, because, in again, if you think therapy is for crazies, how do you think the conversation about I have depression and anxiety goes? Shut down. And I'm someone who suffered a lot through depression, but in silence. Because one, I didn't think, right? One, I don't want to be a burden, right, to the family or friends. And so even going up the ladder, right, I felt like I can only show the accolades of that, but not all of it that it takes to get there, right? The bullying, the systemic things. You're going through that as you're climbing. Yes, you're getting the accolades, but you're also suffering. You mentioned it a little bit. I mean, but when I think about those things, when you're as good as your last game, like that hyper scrutiny that comes with that when you're trailblazing, and it's really hard to go through that alone. So part of the thing I'm doing with my community is like, we need to create community. We need to support one another. We need to champion one another. And we need to nurture those relationships with the champions that we have and make it two-way. And like, because if we support each other and we change those narratives, we can soar, right? We can create space for amazing growth and not just be stuck where we are, where we're all. I can't explain how much, like, we spend so much time competing with one another, even in the workforce, when we should be together, working together to make the change we want to make for each other and for the world. So, and you'll be surprised of how many young people then approach me after my talks and workshops, and they're like, because I also do this with my husband, and they're like, wow, you're the first Latino positive couple I've ever met. You're the first person that's been so honest about their struggles that I've been through, but no one has ever shared that they actually have or had those thoughts. And, or I always thought it was just something was wrong with me because I'm suffering through this and it's so hard for me. But I only see people who just kind of like, they just get there naturally. So it's I don't know, it's so amazing, right, to see that, because I think, so long I hesitated sharing all those things and the things that I went through, and by sharing it, you don't realize how much of an impact you're having on everyone around you. And by sharing it also, you're creating space for these type of role models that don't exist, that are within reach.
Well said. Well said. And I feel like we're so we're so prone to not want to have transformational conversations and connections. So surface layer, surface level. I remember in this 7 years of podcasting, right? 7 years. And there was one particular guest that came on before she came on, and she goes, "When you went in my DM with voice note," she goes, "you instantly shot to the top priority list." Because she goes, "I was looking at it and I'm like, everybody's sending me words. They're texting, they're writing it out. You came with voice." I was like, why is he using voice? Pattern interruption, right? And I champion that a lot of times where I'm like, the power of voice communication is so amazing. That's why sometimes not everything has to go in text. Sometimes it's best sending that voice note because you can hear the tonality. You know what I mean? You can see the passion. You can feel that passion because you can't fake a voice note. You can't, because you'll hear it in the person's tone, just the vernacular. You know what I mean? And so many people are prone to craft text messages. Yeah, you got to craft text messages. Can be for business, could be for something that's quick, but sometimes when you really want to nip things in the butt and get down to the nitty gritty, I'm champion 5 to 7 minute voice notes. One of my best friends will say that. I know, and he'll get like timelines, timestamps. And I know it takes him a couple of days. 'Cause he's like, yo, I gotta process this guy. This guy's podcasting me to death, all of this stuff, whatever. But you know what? That's shout outs to AJ. That's one of my guys. So that's just how it sometimes is.
No, absolutely. And I think people want that connection, right? We're human beings. We want to feel connected. We want more meaningful relationships too. I talk a lot about this, like, like networking. We always like, oh, Eric was like, oh, what's the formula for networking? What's the formula for networking? I'm like, just helping someone, giving value, connecting. It's not a magic formula. It's not about how many LinkedIn messages you send, those things. Like, the true value comes at the connection and wanting to show whatever how to you have to them, and support. And it'll just happen organically. But we spend so much time, like you said, like being like the standard cookie cutter text message or the cookie cutter networking, and we're missing out on all this connection that we're all yearning for. We're human beings, and so much of it we've lost, right, in this, yeah, societal structure we're in.
I know, and it's funny you say that because it's like if you're local. I was at a local game, a basketball game, semi-professional basketball game the other day, and the person, one of my friends, was sitting beside me, and the next person that was sitting beside me was 2 chairs over. And the first thing she said, she's like, "Oh, you look familiar. Where have I seen you from?" And this and that. And I was like, you know what? Because I knew visibly who it already is, and I think she has an idea of who I am just because possibly where I work, dealing with a lot of different, local people here in the city, charity work and podcasting. And it's making that connection to where it's an ad on Instagram. But before I did that ad on Instagram, I left that lasting impression, said, whatever you guys are up to tonight, do it well. I'm heading here, such and such and such. Handshake to the both. You keep it moving because that now leaves that transformation. He's not trying to shoot a shot. He's not trying to get with me. He actually standing on business and principles. Hey, if you want to show up, this is where I'm going to be. But guess what? We can then continue the conversation, or we're going to have the conversation in DM. So it's like, take your pick. What are we doing here? And it's all love,
Exactly.
and it's all peace, and it's always going to be prosperity. You know, that's networking
100%.
tips 101. you know,
Yeah, 100%.
there's so much I really want to get into this book because one of the biggest things is when we were scheduling this, I always do all my homework. And I looked at the book, and the first thing that caught my eye was actually the writing, the color palettes, the wave, white background. You have a green, I believe it's a pink and orange, if I'm correct,
Yep,
right?
and the yellow. Hmm.
And the yellow. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, to an eye test, it makes me want to just look at the book with even not even opening it because it caught my eye. This is your baby. That's your passion project. Let's talk about the book a little bit. What made you write this book?
Oh yeah. So, well, one, I'm glad you like the cover.
Hmm. Oh,
And
don't worry, I'm a deep dive. Just know I'm gonna deep
okay.
dive in the book.
Yeah.
She's like, this guy ain't gonna read the book, is he?
um, so growing up with no money, libraries were my sanctuary. And I had that voice in my head. I was like, I need to get out of here. And plus I had things like dreams that seemed ridiculous then. You know what I mean? Like to others, right? I wanted to travel the world. And no one was traveling the world around me, you know? And I was like, I want to travel the world. I want to see everything. I want to meet people. And it was more about meeting. I wanted to meet people from all across the world. Like, what are their thoughts, you know? How they feel. So I used to go to the library and I would just like read, like even like Lonely Planet books of like different places. And then I would think about, well, how am I going to get there? And I would read autobiographies and self help books, right? And they would give me an idea, like a almost like a blueprint of like, okay, this is how they did it. This is how they got there. You know, they had to work on their mind. They had to work on themselves. They did, you know, they did certain steps. And those books opened my mind to possibilities. So even when I had all those voices around me being like, this is where this is your limits, those books made me feel limitless, that it is possible, right? So part of my own legacy was at some point in my life, I said, when I feel confident that I have something to give to the whole world, that I am confident could provide a transformation and that feeling for someone, that is when I'm going to write it. And I finally got to that place where I'm like, you know what? All these books talked about purpose, but not the how to do it. I am going to fill in that gap and give people that formula. And it doesn't matter if you're in middle school or in high school. You know, I do this purpose exercise with first and fourth graders. And even there, you start seeing when the society has already come into play, right? Into the restrictions. And even if you're 70, I've worked with people who are 75, like trying to figure out they never had the chance to discover the purpose books for everyone. And so for me, it's like I wanted it one. I was like, it has to be in the library. You know, so a big part of me is like having my book I donate to library has to be accessible, right? Because I couldn't afford books, right? Like physical books from a bookstore. So that's why I have the electronic one. People tell me all the time, oh, it's going to make your brand look cheap, offering it at 99 cents. I'm like, it's not about me. I'm like, my book is about making an impact to the world. It's not for me. And so I don't care if people think it's cheap and whatever. I know the content in there is amazing because it's my life's work and I've tested it and I know it works and I did the due diligence. So whether someone else or not, when they read it, they're going to know the value. And so I don't need that external validation. I want it to be accessible. So when I go to universities, I feel that piece that I can be like, everyone here, regardless of your situation, download it. You have the electronic workbook and my book, and not everyone has access to coaching. That was one thing I didn't have when I was a youth. You know, I wanted it so bad, a coach and a mentor, and I would read, you know, that athletes, you know, elite athletes would have 20, and I was like, how amazing is that? One day I want to have that. But in the meantime, books were my coach. So that's why I made a workbook as well. My whole coaching program's in my workbook. It's my whole IP's out there because I want people that, guess what, if you can't work with me one on one, if you do these exercises, you're going to get that clarity you need because I want you to soar. I want us all to soar because I know the world will be a better place if everyone is doing what they're meant to do on this earth. So that was my motivation behind this book, you know, like it's just to give that out there to everyone and make a difference. And I feel for once in my life a complete peace. Like, if I died tomorrow, I feel that I did what I needed to do. You know, like, and it took my whole life to get here, right? And I feel that way just from the messages of people who have told me about the book and how it gave them clarity, helped them make sense of their life, how they resonated with this part. You know, how this part was like, well, they realized, oh my God, they're not alone in that And to think I almost didn't share my story. I almost didn't because I was so afraid to share it. It took me 18 months to write it. The 18 months was not because of the formula part, like the whole thing I was telling you about. That's because of the purpose, my coaching program, all that. That was easy. The hardest part was my story. To be out there, vulnerable, and say it all, and knowing that my family, everyone's going to read it, was this, and the people in my last job were going to read it. Oh, that was really scary. But every time I thought about deleting something, I would meet someone going through that struggle, and I was like, I can't, I can't leave that out because that person needs to know that they're not alone. And so everything's in there.
I love
Yeah.
it. I love it. I love it. Now, let me ask you, is it an audiobook format also too?
Yes, there is an audiobook format. It's actually going to come out in a couple weeks. But yeah, I recorded a full audiobook because I love audiobooks and I love listening to them while I'm working out. And so I wanted to make it in a format that people who like audiobooks as well. And I used to listen to audio tapes back in the day too and rent them from the library. Love them. So I definitely have an audiobook version as well.
Let's go. Let is go. I should hit my soundboard for that right there. I'm like, I'm sitting here, the timing. I'm telling people the timing. You can't plan some of this stuff, eh? You know what I mean? So you already know
No.
I'm there. Right when that link gets posted, I'm gonna make sure, boop, purchase. You know what I mean? I'm gonna make sure. We
Yes.
gotta do that. We have to do that, because you gotta support the creator. You have to support the brand. You have to support. This is what it's all about. We talk about therapy and coaching. A lot of people can't afford it. Myself, life coach, this certified through Dr. Eric Thomas, right? E.T. the Hip Hop Preacher. And I'm not practicing right now because there's a lot. There's a lot that I got to do. This is my first priority of the podcast. What I said is, you know what? I can offer teachings in the podcast. It's free. YouTube's a platform. It's free. Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you search the Mitchell Port Unleashed podcast, wherever you want to search officially Roy, it's all free. That's the free resource you're getting. Now, when I start bringing out the little things, maybe the merch, who knows, maybe a book down the road or, an ebook or something like that, that's where you support back the creator. And sometimes I love that you said it's not necessarily for us. A lot of people want to write books for the vanity metrics to make the money, bestseller. I could expose some secrets about that. But I don't know if the industry would want that. You know what I mean? I don't know if the industry want that. But you know what? It's there. It's just get on your Googles. And I like the ones that go through the podcasts. They champion the underdog podcasts or the underdog entrepreneur or, not the big media moguls that are out there. And you see that. This is labeled conservative media right now. Last time I checked, we're taking over. We sometimes are now up against the mainstream. Mainstream don't like it because the mainstream's like, yo, we got to suppress certain voices. But you can't suppress people that continue to have that fire keep burning. You know what I mean? That's why I appreciate you because
100%.
it's like you see that fire, you see that trailblazer, you see that person that has that characteristic that wants to do what it needs to be done, you know? And that's why I say
Exactly.
shout outs to you. Like, let's go. You know what I mean? Anybody that's listening to this, let's go. I feel like for me, before we get out of here, like 2024, I don't think people really look at 2024 and what it symbolizes. I use a lot of sports references. 2024 is Kobe Bryant's number. It's Kobe's year, ladies and gentlemen. That's mama mentality. Before I get out of here and before I give you back the mic, mama mentality does not start unless you have the basketball. And I'll say this to everybody. What is your basketball? What is it? Your voice could be your basketball. Your hands could be your basketball. What you say, how you do, how you operate, right? Picking up that pen, that pencil, your fingers, typing, writing that book, creating that course, doing those tutorial programs. That's your basketball. And guess what? Your audience are going to be the ones that represent you at the end of the day.
100%. Yep. And when you said basketball, that's when I'm like, yeah, it's your purpose, your fire. You know,
See, I
take
throw the
it.
little sprinkles out. I'm like the what's the guy that gives
Yeah,
the salt and the meat. I just do that, and I just let the people finish it off. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
exactly, exactly.
Real quick, what's the name of the book? What's the name of the book so everybody can check it out?
Yeah, it's called Creating Your Limitless Life, and crossed out is Chasing the American Dream.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm. I love
right
that you
there.
did that. It's like chasing it, just crossed it out, xed it out.
Yep, and then
I'm wait. I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to that audiobook. And you have my word on this. You know, the day it drops, I'm purchasing it right out the gate. You know, and I'm gonna start listening to it because I've picked up one audiobook right now. I can't say the name of it because I don't want to give everybody all the sauce of kind of what where my mind's at right now because they're like, okay, I see what he's doing. When it's all said and done, I will later on in the year. But you know, it's a very aspiring guy that I actually hope to come on the podcast sometime this year. And like I said, just we have to just continue to keep pushing forward. Push forward, guys. Push forward. You know, Esther taking her time on a Monday, you know, mid afternoon before we get into the afternoon, coming on this podcast is the representation of this work. You know, we get this work. You know, we're here to serve. It's not all about us. It's about the audience, about our community. You know, things like that.
exactly, and that's exactly what you're doing. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
for sure. Where can everybody check you out real quick? Plug all your informations, all your socials.
So I'm on Instagram, Be Act Change. I'm also on LinkedIn, and my book is on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Books and Books. You can find it on any bookstore. And yeah, but I'm all about community. So hit me up, DM. I answer. I like to engage. I want to learn about your. I can be your champion. A lot of people tell me, but what if I don't have a champion? But that's what my whole platform is about. I can be your champion. I can champion your dream. So let's, follow me, engage with me. That's what I'm here for.
I love that. I love that. Before we get out of here, I always know with the show, I don't know if you listen to any parts of the show, 1% better. 1% better. Let's talk about it. Take us home. How can we become 1% better 2024 and beyond?
Just starting the work, right? Take my workbook and just go through these questions. You're gonna get to know yourself, right? That's the start, is the awareness, right? It's just sitting down with yourself, like, okay, where is it that I want to go and what I want to do? Taking that one step, okay, where is that awareness, and then taking one action. People always are looking at like, oh, the milestone or when I get there, but just the doing, that 1%, just the doing is transformational. That takes away all those misalignment feelings and puts you in alignment. Just the one action, the one step, just start.
I love that. And that's how we close out the show, ladies and gentlemen. That's how we close out the show. I appreciate you, Esther. Continue to
Thank
keep
you.
do great things. And like I said, you have a lifetime friend here in the social media digital age. And we're gonna do
Same
this again.
here.
I'm gonna invite you coming back on the show. Just trust me.
Yes.
All right.
Same here.